The morning air in the Bavarian Alps carried the crisp scent of pine and mountain flowers. It was just after 10 o'clock, and the sun had already begun its slow climb over the peaks surrounding Berchtesgaden. Along a wooded path on Mooslaner Kopf Hill, the most powerful and feared man in Europe took his daily constitutional, utterly alone. Adolf Hitler walked with his hands clasped behind his back, his German shepherd Blondie occasionally ranging ahead on the trail. The path wound through dense forest, dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy overhead. For 20 minutes each morning, the Führer insisted on solitude. His SS guards remained at their posts, out of sight, under strict orders not to follow. It was one of the few moments in Hitler's increasingly paranoid existence where he allowed himself this small freedom, this brief respite from the suffocating security that defined his life. What Hitler didn't know was that thousands of miles away in London, men in unmarked offices were studying detailed maps of this very walk. They knew the exact route he took. They knew the timing down to the minute. They knew that for a brief window each day, the man orchestrating the deaths of millions was vulnerable in a way he would never be again. They knew that a single well-placed bullet could end the war, save countless lives, and change the course of human history. And they had a plan to take that shot. The path Hitler walked stretched roughly half a mile from his mountain retreat, the Berghof, to a circular tea house he'd had built in 1937. The building sat against the mountainside with panoramic windows overlooking the valley below. It was his favorite destination, far more beloved than the grandiose eagle's nest that Martin Bormann had constructed higher up the mountain. Hitler visited the eagle's nest only a handful of times, but the modest tea house on Mooslaner Kopf, he walked there nearly every single day he spent at Berchtesgaden. The routine was clockwork precise. After his late breakfast, usually around 10 in the morning, Hitler would emerge from the Berghof with Blondie at his side. Sometimes Eva Braun would join him for the walk. Sometimes Albert Speer or another trusted associate. But more often than not, he walked alone, lost in thought, the weight of his collapsing empire momentarily forgotten among the towering pines and alpine meadows. The intelligence that reached British hands in the summer of 1944 painted a picture of astonishing vulnerability. The woods along the walk provided countless positions for concealment, trees thick enough to hide behind, natural depressions in the terrain, rocky outcroppings, and the path itself passed within 100 to 200 meters of perfect shooting positions, well within range for a skilled marksman with a scoped rifle. Even more remarkably, Hitler insisted on walking this path despite his own warnings about the dangers of routine. Years earlier, before the war, he'd lectured his security detail about the importance of unpredictability. He knew that patterns were an assassin's greatest gift. Yet here, in his mountain sanctuary, surrounded by the beauty of the Bavarian Alps, he allowed himself this one predictable indulgence. Perhaps he believed the remoteness of the location provided security enough. Perhaps he thought no enemy could penetrate the layers of SS guards and checkpoints that surrounded the entire Obersalzberg complex. Perhaps, in his growing megalomania, he believed himself invincible, protected by destiny or divine providence. Whatever his reasoning, Hitler's daily walk represented the single greatest opportunity Allied intelligence had yet discovered to eliminate him. No armored car to protect him, no bunker walls 3 feet thick, no food tasters or bomb-sniffing dogs, just a man walking through the woods, presenting a clear line of sight to anyone with the skill and courage to take it. The British had been thinking about killing Hitler for years, but until the summer of 1944, they'd never had intelligence this detailed, this actionable, this perfect. Now they did. And the clock was ticking. Churchill's secret army. On a gray London morning in July 1940, with Nazi Germany triumphant across continental Europe, and Britain standing alone against the Third Reich, Prime Minister Winston Churchill summoned Hugh Dalton, the Minister of Economic Warfare, to a private meeting. What Churchill proposed that day would create one of the war's most secretive and controversial organizations. "We need to set Europe ablaze," Churchill growled, his famous jowls set in determination. Traditional military force had proven insufficient. The British Army had been humiliated at Dunkirk. France had fallen in 6 weeks. Nazi banners flew from Paris to Warsaw. Conventional warfare wasn't enough. Britain needed something new, something ruthless, something willing to fight dirty. Thus was born the Special Operations Executive, known by the innocuous initials SOE. Its headquarters would be established at 64 Baker Street in London, leading to the nickname the Baker Street Irregulars, a playful reference to Sherlock Holmes. But there was nothing fictional or playful about what the SOE was created to do. Its mandate was sabotage, subversion, espionage, and, when necessary, assassination. It would operate in the shadows, conducting what Churchill would later describe as ungentlemanly warfare. The very existence of the SOE rankled many in the British establishment. The Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, viewed it as amateur and dangerous. Bomber Command resented having to divert aircraft for SOE operations when they wanted those planes bombing Germany. Old Guard military officers found the entire concept distasteful, reminiscent of the worst excesses of irregular warfare. There were still those who believed in a gentlemanly approach to war, despite the fact that the enemy had shown no such restraint. But Churchill backed the organization fully. He understood what many of his contemporaries did not, that this war would not be won by playing by traditional rules. The Nazis had rewritten those rules with blitzkrieg and total war. Britain needed to respond in kind. The SOE began recruiting immediately. It sought a particular type of person, brave to the point of recklessness, intelligent, adaptable, and willing to operate behind enemy lines with minimal support. Men and women from all walks of life were brought to secret training facilities scattered across the British countryside. They learned sabotage, silent killing, how to live off the land, how to blend into occupied territories, how to resist interrogation. The organization scored early successes. SOE-trained Czech agents assassinated Reinhard Heydrich, the architect of the final solution, in Prague in May 1942. It was one of the few successful high-level Nazi assassinations of the war, though the reprisals against Czech civilians were horrific, with over 5,000 people murdered in retaliation. SOE operatives parachuted into France, helping coordinate resistance groups in preparation for an eventual Allied invasion. They blew up bridges, derailed trains, gathered intelligence, and made life hell for Nazi occupation forces across Europe. By 1941, Churchill had authorized the SOE to begin planning assassination attempts against top Nazi leaders. Hitler's name was always at the top of the list. But how do you kill the most heavily guarded man in the world? Hitler rarely appeared in public. When he did, security was overwhelming. His movements were unpredictable. His food was tasted. His quarters were swept for bombs. Multiple body doubles existed to confuse potential assassins, and he was protected by layers upon layers of fanatically loyal SS guards who would die before letting anyone near him. The SOE examined every option. Could they bomb his personal train, the Führerzug? The plan was developed in detail. The SOE had extensive experience derailing trains with explosives, but Hitler's train schedule was impossibly irregular. Stations were only notified of his arrival minutes beforehand. The window for action was too small, the risk of failure too high. What about poison? The SOE's chemists developed tasteless, odorless compounds that could be slipped into drinking water or food. But again, the logistics proved daunting. Hitler's paranoia meant everything he consumed was tested multiple times. Getting someone close enough, trusted enough, to poison his food seemed impossible. The plan required an inside man at the highest levels, and no such asset existed. Other schemes bordered on the fantastical. One proposal suggested hypnotizing Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy who had flown to Scotland in 1941, and somehow sending him back to Germany to kill Nazi leaders. The Americans, collaborating with the British, came up with ideas that included injecting female hormones into Hitler's vegetables to make him less aggressive. These plans sound absurd in retrospect, but they reflected the desperate creativity of intelligence agencies searching for any conceivable way to eliminate their enemy. By early 1944, despite years of effort, the SOE had yet to develop a viable assassination plan for Hitler. They had reams of intelligence on his various headquarters, his habits, his security procedures, but nothing actionable, nothing that offered a realistic chance of success. Then came June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. As troops pushed inland, they began taking prisoners by the thousands. German soldiers surrendered in droves, overwhelmed by the scale of the Allied assault. Among those prisoners, mixed in with regular Wehrmacht troops, were men who had served in more specialized roles: guards, staff officers, members of Hitler's personal security detail. And in the chaos of interrogation camps, amidst thousands of captured Germans, British intelligence officers stumbled upon a piece of information that would change everything. the secret in the prison camp. The interrogation room was sparse and functional, bare walls, a wooden table, 2 chairs. A British intelligence officer sat across from a German prisoner, a former member of Hitler's personal guard who'd been captured during the fierce fighting following the Normandy invasion. The prisoner was young, in his 20s, and had served at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Most interrogations focused on military intelligence, troop movements, defensive positions, the location of units, but this officer, trained specifically to gather intelligence on high-value targets, asked different questions. He wanted to know about Hitler himself, his routines, his habits, when he was most vulnerable. At first, the guard was reluctant. Loyalty to the Führer ran deep, even in captivity. But as the questioning continued, as the reality of Germany's situation became clear, the guard began to talk. Perhaps he was war-weary. Perhaps he'd seen enough of the regime's brutality to lose faith. Perhaps he simply wanted the interrogation to end. Whatever his motivation, the intelligence he provided was pure gold. Hitler, the guard revealed, took a morning walk nearly every day when he was at the Berghof. The walk lasted approximately 20 minutes. It always followed the same route, from the main residence to a small tea house about half a mile away through the woods. And here was the critical detail. Hitler insisted on walking alone, or with only 1 or 2 companions. His SS guards were ordered to keep their distance, to remain out of sight at their posts. For those 20 minutes, the most powerful man in Nazi Germany was effectively unprotected. The interrogator pressed for more details. What time did the walk occur? After 10 in the morning, usually around 10:30. Every single day, nearly every day, whenever Hitler was in residence. How could you tell if he was there? A Nazi flag was raised over the Berghof whenever the Führer was present, visible from the town of Berchtesgaden below. The intelligence officer's pulse quickened as he realized what he was hearing. This wasn't speculation or rumor. This was first-hand testimony from someone who'd been there, who'd witnessed this routine countless times. Hitler had created a predictable pattern in a known location, the very thing he'd always warned against, the one vulnerability in an otherwise impenetrable security apparatus. The report made its way up the chain of command with remarkable speed. Within days, it reached Major General Colin Gubbins, the head of SOE. This was a kill order, approved at the highest levels of the British government, with Winston Churchill's personal authorization. The planners had considered multiple approaches, and he immediately grasped the significance of this intelligence. Gubbins convened his senior staff. The German Directorate of SOE, also known as Section X, was responsible for operations inside Nazi Germany itself, arguably the most difficult and dangerous theater for covert operations. The section had been struggling with the Hitler problem for years. Now, suddenly, they had an opening. The Berghof was located in the Obersalzberg, a mountain area near Berchtesgaden in southeastern Bavaria, close to the Austrian border. Hitler had first visited the area in the 1920s and had fallen in love with the stunning alpine scenery. He'd purchased a small chalet called Haus Wachenfeld in 1933, using money from sales of his book Mein Kampf. Over the years, he'd expanded and renovated it into the Grand Berghof, a sprawling complex that served as his second seat of government after Berlin. The entire Obersalzberg had been transformed into a Nazi party compound. Hermann Göring had a house nearby. Martin Bormann lived there. An extensive network of underground bunkers had been constructed beneath the mountain. SS barracks housed security forces. The area was heavily fortified with checkpoints, guard towers, and regular patrols. On paper, it should have been impossible to infiltrate, but the SOE had experience operating in impossible situations. And unlike an assault on a bunker or a bombing raid that might kill civilians, a sniper attack on Hitler during his walk offered precision. One target, one shot, minimal collateral damage. It was elegant in its simplicity. Goebbels ordered the German Directorate to begin detailed planning immediately. They needed maps of the area, photographs, information on the path Hitler walked, security procedures, guard rotations, escape routes, everything. The SOE's intelligence network swung into action, pulling together information from multiple sources. Aerial reconnaissance photographs were obtained from the Royal Air Force. These showed the Berghof complex from above, the layout of buildings, the forested areas, the path to the tea house. German prisoners continued to be interrogated, adding details about security procedures, the number of guards, their typical positions. Most critically, the SOE reached out to its contacts in the anti-Nazi resistance inside Germany. While much smaller and less organized than resistance movements in occupied countries like France or Poland, there were Germans who opposed Hitler. Some were motivated by political ideology, some by moral outrage at Nazi atrocities. Some simply recognized that Hitler was leading Germany to total destruction. Through these channels, the SOE made contact with a shopkeeper in Salzburg, Austria, about 20 kilometers from the Berghof. His name was Heidenthaler, though this may have been a code name rather than his real identity. He was described as vehemently anti-Nazi. Even more promisingly, he was the uncle of a German prisoner of war named Dieser, which may have been how the connection was made. Heidenthaler agreed to serve as the inside man for the operation. He would provide shelter for the assassination team, help them blend in, and transport them close to their target. By late summer 1944, the SOE had assembled enough information to begin crafting an actual operational plan. The codename was assigned, Operation Foxley. It would be detailed, methodical, and ruthless, and if it succeeded, it might end the war in Europe. Operation Foxley, the plan. The dossier that emerged from the SOE's planning process ran to 122 pages. It was labeled Most Secret and distributed only to the highest levels of British intelligence and military command. Declassified in July 1998, a full 50 years after it was created, Operation Foxley remains one of the most detailed assassination plans ever developed by a Western intelligence service. The document began with a clear statement of objectives: the elimination of Hitler and any high-ranking Nazis or members of the Führer's entourage who may be present at the attempt. There was no ambiguity here. This was not a capture mission. The dossier included detailed sections on various methods of assassination, each evaluated for feasibility and likelihood of success. The train option was examined first. Hitler traveled on his personal train, the Führerzug, a heavily armored locomotive with sleeping quarters, conference rooms, and extensive security measures. The SOE had the expertise to derail trains using explosives, a tactic they'd employed successfully against German supply lines throughout occupied Europe. But the train plan had fatal flaws. Hitler's schedule was completely unpredictable. Railway stations were notified of the Führerzug's arrival only minutes in advance. It would be nearly impossible to position explosives in the right place at the right time. The plan was rejected. Poison was considered next. The SOE's chemists had developed several compounds that were tasteless, odorless, and lethally effective in small doses. One proposal involved contaminating the drinking water supply on Hitler's train while it was being serviced at Salzburg station. The plan noted that Hitler was known to be a tea addict who always drank his tea with milk, and that pouring the milk first might mask any slight discoloration from the poison. But the poison plan also required an inside man, someone with access to the train's water system and the opportunity to add the toxin undetected. While Heidenthaler might be able to make introductions to railway workers, actually recruiting someone willing to commit such a high-risk act seemed unlikely. More importantly, Hitler's paranoia meant that food and water was tested multiple times before it reached him. The poison might be detected before it could do its work. This plan, too, was set aside. What remained was the most direct approach, a sniper attack during Hitler's morning walk to the tea house. The plan called for a two-man team to be parachuted into Austria under cover of darkness. One would be a British-trained sniper, an expert marksman capable of making the shot. The other would be a German-speaking Pole who could handle any interactions with locals and serve as backup. Both would be dressed in German mountain troops uniforms, the distinctive Gebirgsjäger outfits worn by German soldiers stationed in alpine regions. This would allow them to move through the area without immediately arousing suspicion if spotted. Upon landing, the team would make contact with Heidenthaler in Salzburg. He would shelter them temporarily, provide them with any additional intelligence about Hitler's current location and schedule, and transport them to the Berghof area. The plan suggested disguising them as workers or using Heidenthaler's connections to get them close without triggering security alerts. The actual attack would require precise timing and nerves of steel. The team would need to infiltrate the wooded area along Hitler's walking path in advance of his morning stroll. Based on the maps and intelligence, multiple potential shooting positions were identified, ranging from 100 to 200 meters from the path. At that distance, a skilled sniper with a quality rifle and scope would have a clear shot. The weapon chosen was telling. Rather than use a British rifle, which would immediately identify the assassins if they were caught or killed, the SOE selected a German Mauser Kar 98K bolt-action rifle fitted with a telescopic sight. This was the standard German military sniper rifle, meaning the shooter would be using the same weapon as Wehrmacht marksmen. The rifle would be specially prepared, tested, and zeroed for accuracy. Explosive bullets were even considered to ensure a kill, even with a less than perfect shot placement. As a backup weapon, the sniper would carry a 9mm Luger pistol fitted with a British-made suppressor. This silenced pistol would allow him to quietly deal with any guards or unexpected encounters during the approach to the shooting position. The Luger used in planning and training for Operation Foxley later went on display at the Combined Military Services Museum in Malden, Essex, a silent artifact of a mission that never happened. The plan accounted for failure. If the initial sniper shot missed, or if Hitler survived but was merely wounded, a second assassination attempt would be made immediately. The backup plan involved positioning a two-man team nearby with a Piat gun, essentially a British anti-tank weapon similar to an American bazooka. As Hitler's security rushed him back to the Berghof, most likely in an armored vehicle, the Piat team would ambush the motorcade. The planners believed guards would be so focused on getting Hitler to safety that they wouldn't expect a second attack. The PIAT could penetrate vehicle armor, and the blast would almost certainly kill everyone inside. The planning documents included remarkable detail. Maps showed the entire Berghof complex, with Hitler's residence, other buildings, guard posts, and patrol routes all carefully marked. The path to the tea house was traced in red. Potential shooting positions were circled. Distances were calculated. Sightlines were analyzed. The SOE had even obtained photographs of the tea house itself, showing its circular design, large windows, and the terrace where Hitler often stood to admire the view. Intelligence reports included in the dossier described Hitler's security arrangements in extensive detail. The Berghof was protected by the Reichssicherheitsdienst, or RSD, Hitler's personal SS bodyguard unit. Regular patrols circled the compound. Checkpoints controlled all roads leading to the area. But critically, during Hitler's walk, the guards were ordered to maintain their distance. They would be visible at various points, but too far away to intervene immediately if something happened. The plan noted that Hitler was often visible to SS guard posts at the Gutshof farm for about 100 yards of his walk, and could be seen from guard positions at the Theaterhalle and Göring's Landhaus at distances over 500 yards when he crossed certain open areas. But there were stretches of the path where he disappeared from view entirely, walking through thick forest where no guard post could maintain visual contact. It was in these hidden sections that the assassination would take place. Training began for the mission. A sniper was recruited, though his identity remains somewhat murky in the historical record. He practiced shooting at moving dummy targets under conditions designed to simulate the actual attack, firing from concealed positions in wooded terrain at targets approximately 200 meters away. The goal was to achieve absolute reliability, the ability to make the shot under pressure in unfamiliar territory, with no second chances. By November 1944, Operation Foxley was ready. The plan had been refined, the personnel selected, the equipment prepared. All that remained was final authorization to proceed. The documents were submitted to senior leadership for approval. And that's when everything fell apart. The Great Debate. The meeting room at Baker Street headquarters was tense. Senior officers of the SOE sat around a long table, the Operation Foxley dossier in front of them. The plan was technically sound. The intelligence was reliable. The opportunity was real. But before giving final approval, they had to confront a troubling question. Should they actually kill Adolf Hitler? The loudest opposition came from Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Thornley, deputy head of the SOE's German Directorate. Thornley was fluent in German, understood Nazi psychology, and had been thinking deeply about the long-term implications of assassinating Hitler. And he believed it was a terrible idea. His argument was multifaceted and persuasive. First, there was the martyrdom problem. If Hitler was killed by a British sniper, he would instantly become a legend. The Nazi propaganda machine would portray him as a heroic leader cut down in his prime by cowardly enemy agents. Many Germans, particularly those still loyal to the regime, would believe that Germany might have won the war if only their Führer had survived. This was dangerous thinking. Germany had already been down this road once before. After World War I, the stab in the back myth had taken hold. The false narrative that Germany's military had been on the verge of victory, but had been betrayed by politicians who signed the armistice. This myth had been instrumental in Hitler's rise to power. It had poisoned German politics for a generation. The last thing the Allies needed was to create a similar myth around Hitler's death, especially when Germany was clearly losing the war through its own strategic and moral failures. Thornley argued that it was essential for the German people to understand that Nazism itself was bankrupt, that Hitler's ideology had led them to ruin. If he died a martyr's death at the hands of foreign assassins, that lesson might be lost. But if he survived to see Germany's total defeat, if he was captured or killed in Berlin as Soviet troops closed in, the complete failure of his regime would be undeniable. There was another consideration, equally cynical, but perhaps more immediately relevant. By late 1944, Hitler was actively helping the Allied cause through his strategic incompetence. He had assumed personal control of German military operations, overruling his generals, making disastrous tactical decisions, refusing to allow retreats even when they were militarily necessary. His megalomania and detachment from reality meant he was making terrible choices that accelerated Germany's defeat. One SOE officer involved in the Foxley planning put it bluntly. As a strategist, Hitler has been of the greatest possible assistance to the British war effort. Thornley went further, writing that a living Hitler was worth almost an unlimited number of first-class SOE agents strategically placed inside Germany. The argument was that any successor to Hitler, whether Göring, Himmler, or a military figure, would likely be more competent. They might make rational decisions about German military strategy. They might consolidate defenses effectively. They might even seek a negotiated peace with the Western Allies while continuing to fight the Soviets. Hitler's death might actually extend the war rather than shorten it, as a more capable leader rallied German forces. Others in the room pushed back against Thornley's arguments. How many more people would die if the war continued? How many more Jews and other victims would perish in the concentration camps? Every day the war continued meant more suffering. If there was even a chance that killing Hitler could shorten the war by weeks or months, wasn't it worth trying? The debate grew heated. Some argued that the moral imperative to kill Hitler outweighed all strategic considerations. Here was a man responsible for the deaths of millions, whose armies had devastated Europe, whose regime had industrialized genocide. If British intelligence had the opportunity to eliminate him, how could they not take it? Others countered that war demanded cold calculation, not moral satisfaction. The question wasn't whether Hitler deserved to die. Obviously, he did. The question was whether killing him would help Britain and its allies win the war. And if the answer was unclear, or even if killing him might make things worse, then the plan should be rejected, regardless of how satisfying it might be to see Hitler dead. There were practical concerns as well. What if the assassination failed? What if the sniper was captured? The torture and interrogation would be horrific. More importantly, it would reveal that the British had intelligence on Hitler's daily routine at the Berghof, potentially causing him to change his habits and making future assassination attempts impossible. A failed attempt might be worse than no attempt at all. And what about the reprisals? When Reinhard Heydrich was assassinated in Prague, the Nazis had responded with savage brutality. The entire village of Lidis was destroyed, every man murdered, women and children sent to concentration camps. Over 5,000 Czechs were killed in reprisals. If Hitler was assassinated, would there be similar massacres? How many innocent lives might be lost in retaliation? Winston Churchill, when consulted, was supportive of the plan. He'd authorized assassination plots against Nazi leaders back in 1941. He saw no moral problem with killing enemy leadership, particularly when that leadership was responsible for unprecedented evil. But Churchill also trusted his experts. If Thornley and others believed the plan was strategically unsound, he would defer to their judgment. The debate might have continued indefinitely, but events intervened to make it all moot. The end of an opportunity. On July 20th, 1944, a bomb exploded in a conference room at the Wolfschanze, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. The blast killed 4 people and wounded several others, but Adolf Hitler, the intended target, survived with only minor injuries. The briefcase containing the bomb had been moved just before detonation, placing a heavy oak table leg between Hitler and the explosive. That table leg saved his life. The assassination attempt was led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a decorated war hero who'd lost an eye and his right hand in combat. Stauffenberg was part of a broader conspiracy of German military officers and civilians who'd concluded that Hitler had to be removed if Germany was to be saved from total destruction. Operation Valkyrie, as the plot was known, aimed not just to kill Hitler, but to stage a coup d'etat, arresting Nazi leaders and negotiating peace with the Western Allies. The plot failed catastrophically. When news spread that Hitler had survived, the coup attempt collapsed. Stauffenberg and other ringleaders were arrested and executed within hours. In the weeks that followed, the Gestapo launched a massive investigation that uncovered hundreds of people with some connection to the plot. Approximately 200 were eventually executed, many after being tortured to reveal the names of co-conspirators. The failed assassination had immediate repercussions for Operation Foxley. Hitler's security was massively increased. He became even more paranoid, even more unpredictable in his movements. But more critically, Hitler left the Berghof on July 14th, just 6 days before the Stauffenberg attempt, and he never returned. The British didn't know this immediately. Their intelligence on Hitler's exact location was always incomplete. But as summer turned to fall and then winter, it became clear that the opportunity at Berghof was gone. Hitler spent the remaining months of the war at various military headquarters closer to the front lines, and finally in the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. The daily walk through the Bavarian woods was over. Operation Foxley continued to be refined and updated through the fall of 1944 and into early 1945, operating on the assumption that Hitler might return to Berchtesgaden. In March 1945, with the war clearly in its final weeks, the British even approached a potential sniper for the mission. The man they contacted was Captain Edmund Bennett, a British officer serving as a military attaché in Washington, D.C. The choice was peculiar, to say the least. Bennett was not an SOE operative. He was not a trained sniper. He did not speak German, and according to his wife, who was interviewed years later when the Foxley documents were declassified, he suffered from astigmatism that caused blurred vision. He was, by his wife's account, a terrible shot. Why Bennett was approached remains one of the mysteries of Operation Foxley. The SOE had trained snipers with dozens of confirmed kills. They had German-speaking operatives who could pass as natives. They had people who'd been preparing for precisely this type of mission. The fact that they reached out to Bennett, an officer with no obvious qualifications for the job, suggests either desperation or that significant portions of the documentary record have been lost. Eric Lee, author of the most comprehensive book on Operation Foxley, believes there must have been other candidates whose names don't appear in the surviving files. The alternative, he notes, would be incredible ineptitude on the part of the SOE, which seems unlikely given their successful operations elsewhere. When contacted, Bennett reportedly expressed enthusiasm for the mission, undeterred by the difficulty or danger. But by the time this conversation took place, it was late March 1945. The war had only weeks left to run. Soviet forces were closing on Berlin from the east. American and British forces were across the Rhine and pushing deep into Germany. The Third Reich was collapsing. On March 26, 1945, the SOE officially canceled Operation Foxley. A telegram was sent to New York informing them that Bennett's services would not be required after all. The plan that had consumed so much time, energy, and resources would never be executed. What might have been? Historical counterfactuals are always speculative, But it's impossible not to wonder what would have happened if Operation Foxley had proceeded and succeeded. If a British sniper had killed Adolf Hitler during his morning walk in the summer of 1944, how would the war have unfolded? The optimistic scenario, the one that haunted the planners who wanted to proceed with Foxley, is straightforward. Hitler's death in July 1944 might have led to a rapid German collapse. The Nazi regime was built around the Führer cult. Hitler was not just the political leader, but the emotional, ideological, and symbolic center of the entire system. His death in mid-1944 might have shattered that structure overnight. Some German generals might have moved quickly to end the war. Others might have fought for power. Civil war within the Nazi leadership was not impossible. In that chaos, the killing might have saved tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives. But history suggests a darker, more complicated possibility. The Nazi state was already radicalized beyond repair. Himmler, Goebbels, Goering, and the SS leadership were deeply invested in continuing the war to the bitter end. Even without Hitler, the machinery of repression, genocide, and total war would not have vanished overnight. The camps would not have emptied instantly. The armies would not have laid down their weapons automatically. The war might have continued, only under new leadership, perhaps more rational, perhaps more dangerous. And there is one more uncomfortable truth. By 1944, Hitler was no longer the strategic genius his propaganda portrayed. He was isolated, paranoid, physically deteriorating, and increasingly detached from reality. His refusal to retreat, his obsession with holding ground at all costs, and his habit of overruling experienced generals were actively accelerating Germany's defeat. In a cruel twist of history, Adolf Hitler had become one of the Allies' greatest unintentional assets. Killing him might have removed the very man who was making the worst decisions. A more competent successor might have shortened German supply lines, might have consolidated defenses, might have prolonged the war. In that sense, Hitler alive was strategically more useful than Hitler dead. This was the terrible paradox at the heart of Operation Foxley. Morally, killing Hitler seemed unquestionably right. Strategically, it was far less certain. In the end, history made the decision for them. Hitler never returned to his morning walks. The forests of the Bavarian Alps never echoed with the crack of a British sniper's rifle. Operation Foxley remained ink on paper, a plan that came closer to changing history than almost anyone realized. 9 months later, in April 1945, Adolf Hitler did die. Not on a woodland path, not from a British bullet, but alone, underground, in a concrete bunker beneath a ruined Berlin. No martyr's death, no heroic legend, no final speech to inspire a nation. Just a dictator, defeated by the war he started, choosing suicide as his world collapsed around him. Operation Foxley stands today as one of the greatest what-ifs of World War II. It reveals how close history came to taking a very different turn. It shows how intelligence, opportunity, and moral debate collided in the shadows. And it reminds us that sometimes the most powerful decisions in war are not the actions taken, but the actions deliberately not taken. Britain had a clear shot at Hitler. They chose, for reasons both strategic and unsettling, to let him live. And in doing so, they left history to run its brutal, inevitable course.